of Cinema, episode number 147. Being recorded on Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025 at 6:18 p.m. I have a sweater on, and it is very, very comfortable. And I hope you all are staying comfortable as well if you are like myself and are living in a cold climate. I tell you, I got out of work today and there was so much frost on the car, man. It was like, any kind of water that got on it was freezing so quickly. It became a driving hazard. So make sure that you are heating up your cars if you need to. Put those defrosters on. And make sure you're opening the doors too, even if you're not using the doors like in the back seat or whatever. My the door to my trunk is frozen solid right now. So if I need anything in there, man, I'm gonna be in some trouble. But thankfully I don't. So, anyways, here we are back for another episode talking about more films. Gonna talk about a couple recent theatrical films. Tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow. The Oscar Best Picture nominations will be announced, so that'll be talked about in the next episode, and I'm confident I've seen all of them, all except for one that I'm seeing on Friday. So if it is going to be nominated, so we'll talk about that when we talk to. But so one film I'm not going to talk too much about because I will talk a bit more when the time comes. Is I want to talk about Brady Corbet's new film, The Brutalist. Was very curious to see this film. The Brutalist, starring, it's got a good cast actually, starring Adrian Brody. We have Guy Pearce in the film. Felicity Jones is in the film. Stacey Martin, it was really nice to see her pop up. She's, in the past couple of years, has become a really talented actress. She's one of these performers who was mostly in smaller roles, but always glad to see her in these films. I think she's a very good actress, has a real kind of classic sort of beauty to her, and I'm definitely a fan of her, so it's nice to see her. But The Brutalist, man, I'll get more into it when the nominations are announced, but this is definitely the one I'm putting all my cards on. It's an epic film in its scope, in its time period, spanning, a long period of time, in its runtime, so much so there's an intermission that's, interestingly enough, actually part of the film itself. Normally you'd have an intermission and it's not part of the literal film. It would just be time for the projectionist to change the reel over to the next one. Not as if that's the only time, because you're running a film print. You'll have multiple kind of reels to change over to, But here it's actually embedded in the film, so that's very interesting. But it's a brilliant film. I loved it. I won't go too much into it, but my gosh, man, it was one of these feelings that when the film ended and the credits came up with its interesting brutalist style sort of credit roll, I was like, my gosh, man, I have just experienced a truly excellent film. When we walked into it, I didn't really fully know what it was about. I mean, the title, The Brutalist, I knew it was about brutalist architecture, lots of open space, and boy, oh boy, just what a brilliant film. Of the supposed maybe films that may be nominated, we'll see. It's the only one that I'm truly over the heels enthusiastic about. So wonderful film. We'll talk more should it be nominated. If not, I'll come back to it and I'll circle back around. But another recent theatrical film. Let's talk about the new film from Pedro Almodovar, The Room Next Door. Pedro Almodovar is such an interesting filmmaker. One of the great Spanish filmmakers, most known for films like Women on the Verge of Nervous Breakdown, of course, All About My Mother, Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, all wonderful films, all excellent films. And in the past couple years, it's been kind of interesting to see some of the directions that he has taken with his work. I haven't seen all of his films. There's a handful that I haven't seen. There's a period in the mid 2000s, and that's kind of where my big blind spot is, where I haven't seen Talk to Her, or Bad Education, Volver, or Broken Embraces. That's from 2002 to 2009. But It's interesting what he's kind of the direction that he's taken. Almodovar is such a great filmmaker when it comes to writing very interesting, complex female characters. More kind of personal sort of personal sort of drama with relationships with their own sort of how do I want to put it, their own sort of moralities. A film like Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down has interesting kind of moralities with Antonio Banderas' character and how that all plays out. I think in that book that I read, they talked about some of the controversy behind the film, and but Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, one of his strongest films. Perhaps may even, I don't want to choose favorites at all, because that'd be inappropriate, especially at a time like this when I haven't properly rewatched it. But I would say that and Women on the Verge of Nervous Breakdown, I think, are two of his absolute highlights. But I keep kind of circling back, but the past, I would say, maybe 15 years or so have been interesting. The only films of recent that I haven't seen is I'm So Excited and Julieta. And from what I've heard, I've heard people say that I'm So Excited is one of his weakest films. I remember when that came out, I wasn't terribly familiar with Almodovar at the time. That was released in 2013. I think I had been aware of him, but I hadn't really delved too much into his filmography. But he did The Skin I Live in 2011. Like I said, I'm So Excited in 2013. Julieta in 2016. Pain and Glory in 2019. He did the short film The Human Voice in 2020. Did the feature Parallel Mothers in 2021. The short film Strange Way of Life in 2023. And now he has his first English language film, The Room Next Door, in 2024. Although The Human Voice was English language as well, so I think they mean English language feature. And I have a weird kind of push and pull with his recent work. I think The Skin I Live In is a really, really solid film. I've heard it kind of classified as a horror film, and that's a bit of a stretch. For me, I'm not gonna, draw the line at what is and isn't genre fair. I think far too much time is spent on that. I definitely don't see it as a horror film though. It's definitely very much a twisted kind of thriller crime film, and just the way that the plot unfolds is kind of like, what, like, the in a good way, where like when you get to some of the character motivations and what happens to some of the characters, it's strange and it's disturbing, but it's so interesting, and it's such a well made film, such an adult film. I say adult in the way that the material is handled, not adult as in explicit content. But that feels like such a departure from his other work, but it still feels like a really kind of mature film given the subject matter. That his recent work I find a little bit tricky. With The Room Next Door in particular, it's a film that there were times where it felt like really mature, smart writing. I won't get too much into the plot because, I mean, the thing with his trailers, and I've seen a bunch of his trailers for his films the past couple years, the trailers are almost intentionally vague, where you really don't know what the film is about. So I won't really get into it. Basically, to be very vague, Julianne Moore is in the film. She's a writer. She's a successful writer. The opening of the film is her at a book signing event. A lot of people admire her. She gets involved with Martha, played by Tilda Swinton, somebody whom I think they used to know. They used to know each other. Were never too close, but knew each other well enough, and they basically get into an agreement, a troubling agreement for Julianne Moore, and how that all kind of plays out. We also have in the film John Turturro is in a small role, but is very good in the film as well, and it's interesting seeing his contrast with him and Julianne Moore's character. John Turturro I forgot what he was as well. He was giving a lecture at one point. I don't know if he was a writer, he was a professor, I don't exactly remember, but he has a very kind of nihilistic look at the world. He's very upset with how people are treating the earth and society as a whole. He's really kind of distanced himself. And the contrast between Julianne Moore, who perhaps, given her own experience, could easily kind of fall into that sort of idea of somebody who maybe could be nihilistic and could be apathetic to existence, but is kind of is very emotional and is very involved in the specific situation that contrasts him. And there's a weird sort of artificiality that I have with some of his writing. This was also co-written by Sigrid Nunez, who also okay. This was okay. No, I'm sorry. This is based off the book. I knew it was based off a novel, but I didn't. I forgot that it was whatever based off the novel. What Are You Going Through? Written by Sigrid Nunez. But some of the dialogue in this film, I don't know if it's the delivery, I don't know if it's the way it's written, but it felt kind of the same way as I did with Parallel Mothers. And especially with Strange Way of Life. Now, I liked Parallel Mothers and I liked Strange Way of Life, but there's an almost kind of artificial intellectualism that the character's dialogue doesn't totally feel sincere. It feels very much like characters who are really, very well read, very articulate, but in a way that doesn't seem sincere. And the way that clashes between the more kind of tender moments, it makes the characters feel kind of cold for me, in a way where with some of his recent work, I feel almost at a distance with the characters, where I'm not quite emotionally invested in what should be an emotionally a very emotional situation, especially for Julianne Moore, who I found to be the most interesting character in the film. Somebody who has to deal with this kind of her own kind of questionable morality in a situation like this. Of what does she do of her relationship with Martha, their past, sort of how she sees their relationship in terms of does Martha really she cares about her, but to what extent, and almost this kind of this the contrast between them, Martha's ambivalence toward this major event, and as opposed to Ingrid's more kind of humanistic, reactionary sort of outlook on it. It's a fascinating film, but it does kind of lump into Parallel Mothers in that way, where I'm not quite as invested with the characters. I'm not really as not that I'm not interested, but I don't think they're presented in a way that really kind of lends itself to really kind of wrap you up in this scenario. Pain and Glory, I saw a couple years ago, so my memory's a little vague on that. But I remember the strongest parts of that being actually a somewhat semi-autobiographical look, where you have Antonio Banderas in that film playing this character Salvador, is basically playing Almodovar. And I remember the strongest parts of that film being the flashbacks between when Salvador was a child and his mother, played by Penelope Cruz. And then the contemporary stuff with Antonio Banderas and his, I forgot if it was his lover, but it was also somebody they worked with. I apologize, I'm going solely off memory here, but that stuff didn't work quite as well. And I remember I think I talked about Strange Way of Life on the show when it originally came out. I guess I see what he's going for there, but there's a bizarre kind of alien-like quality to that film. It's a short film. It's actually, it's about a half hour or so. It's available on Netflix. But it's Almodovar, and that's also in English as well, I should also say. So The Room Next Door is his first English feature film. But it almost feels like, I don't know, somebody doing an Almodovar type film, but not being able to kind of get the characters down in a way. The relationship between Ethan Hawke and I always forget the actor's name, Pedro Pascal's character, feels so insincere and feels so artificial that when Almodovar's talking about why he didn't make it a feature, it's almost like what I still think about now is sort of like if you weren't going to make it a feature, I don't really know what you're trying to get at here. This all feels like a proof of concept, where in the great kind of discussion that Almodovar had after the film, where he's talking about what he would have done with the script and how he wanted to do something a less masculine kind of Western, where it's more about the characters and their emotions with each other. It's sort of, that's all good and well, but then it's sort of like, but if you're not going to do it, then it's sort of like, why even make the short to begin with? I'm not really sure what to get out of this besides missed opportunity. Not even a missed opportunity, let me put it that way, but this sort of just what could have been a what to do with. But with Almodovar as well, although I'm not quite as enthusiastic about his recent fare, I'm still always eager to see whatever he puts out. I was looking forward to this film, and I don't think I would. I mean, I would recommend it for Almodovar fans in particular, but on its own, as its own drama, I think the artificiality of it all doesn't really mesh well. It feels a little cold and distant, but with good performances throughout. Julianne Moore, Tilda Swinton, John Turturro all have their moments. But it's also weird because I think the ADR on this was really bad. I don't know, man. There was a scene early on where Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton are talking on a bench, and that I can't confirm if it was ADR, but my gosh, I was sitting in that cinema, man, and it almost completely took me out of the film because it felt like these characters are talking in a studio, but the dialogue isn't like they're saying in a studio, but these characters are outside. It was so bizarre, and I've never seen anything like it. And I almost couldn't even focus on the scene at hand. But interesting film nonetheless. Even a mediocre Almodovar, which I'm not saying this is mediocre, but I'm saying even if this is maybe one of his lesser films, it's always still fascinating. So I would say worth seeing nonetheless should you come across it. And on the topic of great filmmakers, we'll do an inverse, man. We're going to talk about one of the earlier works, earlier, so to speak, from the great Michelangelo Antonioni. I had the opportunity to see theatrically the new 4K restoration of his 1957 film, Il Grido, aka The Outcry, aka The Cry. Although I think The Outcry is a more appropriate title, especially where the film goes to. And boy, oh boy, what a brilliant film. Antonioni is a filmmaker who his work you really have to settle with. These are very, what's what I'm looking for? Very meditative, very quiet, very slow films in a way that I always think of the gag from Night Moves, where Gene Hackman is talking about Romer. He makes a joke like, "Oh, I saw a new Romer film," and the character asks, "How was it?" He says, "It's kind of like watching paint dry," which I always find funny. And I've heard the same criticism for Antonioni's films. People either really love him or are not as big on him. And to me, I find that the more of his work that I watch, the more I get out of it. I've seen a handful of his work. His earlier work, I'm admittedly unfamiliar with, more unfamiliar with, I should say. I would say this is probably the earliest of his I've seen, but I've seen La Ventura, La Notte, L'Eclise, Red Desert, Blow Up, Zabriskie Point, and The Passenger. And The Passenger is a good film to kind of, I wouldn't even say compare this to, but it was reminding me of a lot. We have this film, The Outcry, which stars the great Steve Cochran. Great filmmaker, plays his character great actor, I should say, not great filmmaker. Plays his character Aldo. He's living in the small kind of town. He works in a I forgot what he did. It wasn't construction. It was like a refinery kind of place. But anyways, his he lives with Irma, played by Alida Valli, who you'd most recognize for fans of The Third Man, as well as other films like Eyes Without a Face. She's a wonderful, wonderful actress, but they are in a relationship together, and her former husband, has passed away. Her estranged husband, so to speak. And to Aldo, this is a sign that they can finally get together. They could be together, but in the process, after waiting all that time, she has fallen in love with someone else. And this leaves Aldo at a personal sort of crisis where he, publicly takes his, he's slapping around Irma in public. She is like, "I'm done. I'm not doing this." And the great thing is that the characters don't have to say it. They don't have to, a film now would have to, a mainstream sort of film made for a general audience would have to tell the audience, this is what's happening. And when Aldo is slapping her around, the audience going, "Okay, I don't like him. He's the bad guy." Aldo's not a bad guy. He's frustrated. He does some not so nice things, but he's a very sort of he's a complex character. He has a lot of inner turmoil. Anyways, he takes his daughter Rosina, played by Marina Gherardi, and he is going across the countryside. So we have these beautiful open vistas. these beautiful kind of isolated settings. The whole film feels very isolated. I mean, the small town has this like little kind of refinery. Everybody kind of knows each other. There's a point in the film where things kind of come full circle, so to speak, and you get the sense that everybody really knows each other. Everyone's very close knit. They're very sort of far away from one another, and because there's even like a long stretch of the film, or the stretch of the film I should say, where he ends up meeting up with a gas station attendant played by Dorian Gray, who I was unfamiliar with in terms that I read that Antonioni's one of his frequently used actresses, Monica Vitti, did the dubbing for her. I didn't recognize that at first, but Dorian Gray's in the film, who you would remember most famously from Knights of Cabiria from Fellini, and that whole section of the film is great. He has this inner turmoil where he feels lost. He tries to connect himself with various women that he encounters, but he really can't find any kind of sticking ground. He really can't find anywhere to settle in, because even the place like this, at this little gas station where you meet an interesting kind of cast of characters, people kind of running through. There's a great bit where a biker tries to scam Virginia out of some gas, and there's a whole kind of comical bit on that. And although basically is left behind to take care of the station, even though he could easily just leave, but he sees this kind of comfort, sees this sort of stability at first. And what happens with that relationship, the complications with being a father. We have this young girl running around with him, and she's out of school. She's really like it's really almost being reckless, running out in front of cars. And it's what Antonioni does best. It's these long, kind of somber moments where you don't need dialogue. You just have the reaction of a character. You have two characters who are really kind of pouring their hearts out to one another, really kind of looking for some meaning, not only in just themselves, but in this companionship in a sort of way. Aldo feels betrayed after this period of time when he's been led along. He lives a very quaint life, a very small life, and the one thing that he really had is really kind of taken away from him. And no one's fault, of their own. It's not Irma's fault that she fell in love with somebody else, but it's the way the situation was handled and how that ends up coming full circle by the end. It's a beautiful film, man. This was one that, like I said, this was a new 4K restoration. I don't think it was projected in 4K. That's the thing. That's the thing you got to look out for oftentimes as well, is that if you're going to see a film that's projected, that's a new 4K restoration, it's whether or not it can actually be presented that way. One of the cinemas that I attend, they actually have upgraded their projectors, so a lot of the films that get screened there now look beautiful. And the reason why I was mentioning before with The Passenger is that it reminded me so much that I think his films have that sort of aspect of characters wandering, being unsure of life, being unsure of themselves. Red Desert comes to mind in particular, but we have The Passenger from 1975, which is one of his three, I think it was Blow Up, Zabriskie Point, and this, which was part of a contract with, was it United Artists? But I've talked about. I don't think I've actually talked about Blow Up on the show. Perhaps I can come to that at some point. But this is follow up to Zabriskie Point. Zabriskie Point, I've mentioned before. I think is an interesting film at times. I don't think it's his most. For one, is most subtle. It's definitely not. And two, I don't think all the ideas come across. And I've mentioned before, of course, that's a great film to watch with. The Other Side of the Wind, which Orson Welles is directly not parodying, but it's definitely using that as a backdrop for that. But Zabriskie Point is 1970. This is 1975. I don't know. I mean, at least feature-wise, because he did this documentary, which I'm unfamiliar with, Chung Kuo, China, from 1972. But in terms of the deal, the three-picture deal, The Passenger was coming to mind as well, where you have Jack Nicholson's character in the film, who really is wandering around, and his character in that being kind of disillusioned with society and really kind of dropping out in a way. But at the same time, there's more going on with this character that sort of we find out along the way. But then his relationship with Maria Schneider's character and sort of their back and forth, in that film as well. Jack Nicholson is very quiet, doesn't say a whole lot of dialogue. It's really kind of what's felt and not heard. And that's a brilliant film as well. The Passenger was one that I hadn't seen until last year, and I was kind of just blown away by. I really just love that film. But The Outcry, because this was a new restoration by Yanis Films, I imagine that this will get an announcement, I imagine, in the near future. I mean, for a Criterion or whoever else puts this out, I mean, this will definitely be available. I have no idea the availability on this. I don't know how commonly seen this film is in terms of availability. But if you are as much of a fan as Antonioni like myself and are eager to see more of his work, this is one that cannot be slept on. It is a brilliant film. This is already, I mean, we're only 22 days into January, but I can confidently say this is at the end of the year when I do my kind of, favorite kind of first time watches discoveries. There's unquestionably will be one of my favorite things I've watched this year. I just loved this film. And it's a good film to watch theatrically too. You're not distracted by your telephone. You're not distracted by noises in the other room or anything like that. You're just there with the film. I watched it in a beautiful cinema on a balcony, man. I had my girlfriend next to me. It was just such a perfect setting, man. I could not take my eyes off the screen. Loved this film. Just one of my favorite discoveries this year, man. It's what a brilliant film. Loved it. Keep an eye out on it if you are a fan of Antonioni. Admittedly, if you're not, I would still recommend it. But if you're not a fan of some of his other work, like I guess specifically maybe Red Desert or The Passenger, then you may not be as enthusiastic about this film. But if you're like myself, I say go for it. I also forgot to mention at the top of the show, it seems kind of redundant at this point, but everyone's kind of already mentioned it, but the passing of David Lynch. I won't go too much on about it, because I think everybody's, I mean, at this point, it's been a week old, and if you're listening to this in the future, even longer, but, we are inspired by David Lynch. We use him with our art, and with his passing, we it's one thing to be upset, to be sad that we lost a great American artist, but it also makes us happy because we got to live at a time where we get to experience these brilliant films like Eraserhead, like Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, people who like Twin Peaks and stuff, and that's great. I think I've seen almost everything. I haven't seen The Straight Story, and I don't think I've seen All the Elephant Man. I guess I thought I did, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, I don't think I've sat down from beginning to end and watched that. I mean, we watched it in school, of course, but I don't have a good memory of that film. But either way, I mean, I've already opened up, you open up Canopy, they already have a bunch of his films there. There's many documentaries about David Lynch, you can see him in acting in a bunch of stuff. There's that documentary that I wanted to watch, David Lynch, The Art Life, which will be watched soon for contextual reasons. And I recently, coincidentally enough, about a week or two ago, did watch the Lynch Oz documentary, which I wasn't really a fan of. I really thought it was it didn't need to, for as long as it didn't really say a whole lot. But for people who are fans of his work, I think, just seeing the clips, hearing John Waters talk about Lynch and sort of perhaps Lynch's reaction to the 1950s, it's all very fascinating. Lynch was somebody who was very, very, not exactly secretive, but lets you sort of interpret what you want from the film for many good interpretations of something like Eraserhead, which has had many different interpretations, many different reactions. Is there a concrete answer? Only David Lynch knows. And for us, we are forever grateful to be alive at a time we get to experience his work. So whether you're listening to this where you're near a glass or a drink or anything like that, or you don't have one, raise your literal or your metaphorical glass to David Lynch. We say thank you for all of the great films, and we'll continue to live on every single day from the inspiration of you. So, all right, man, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed the newest episode of Peephole Pictures. It came a little bit later than I expected it to, but it's been so busy lately that the fact that I got it at all is great, and I gotta get the next film ready, man. I keep forgetting to do that, so I'm gonna get ahead on that. But thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, your night. Make sure you're keeping with your 2025 tasks that you said you were gonna do. That novel's not gonna write itself. That film is not gonna be made by itself. Whatever it is you gotta do, stick with it, man, to the very end. So hey, that's all I got. Thank you.